Hi friends, I wanted to give you an update on what's been happening with Washington and all the nonsense that's unfolding before your very eyes. It's interesting for history, but it's also dangerous for our future as a nation. So there are two basic components of this report. The first, we want to talk about the Inspector General's report that came out and the hearings that subsequently followed it this past Wednesday in the U.S. Senate. And also the second thing would be the two articles of impeachment that were approved by the House Judiciary Committee and now are going to be sent to the full House for a vote this coming Wednesday. So let's get right into it. And again, the goal here is to cut through all the haze, all the smoke, all the propaganda, and just give you the basic facts so that you can understand what's going on as best, at least I understand it, and I'm just trying to share what I've learned with you. This isn't all my own information. I've gleaned it from various sources, trusted media sources, trusted online sources, people who really know, and I believe it's truthful or I wouldn't be sharing it with you. So let's start first with the Inspector General's report. The Inspector General was tasked with investigating this whole incident of the FISA Court abuses by the FBI and the Department of Justice in their efforts to spy on the Trump campaign. Now, this started a few years ago, actually in 2016 before the election was held, and they've been trying to kind of cover things up and cover their backsides ever since. The Inspector General is somebody who is tasked with just finding information. Essentially, they're like an accountant doing an audit of somebody's books to give a picture of what's really going on financially with a company or a person or organization. Well, the Inspector General's doing that for the Department of Justice, and that would, of course, include the FBI, and specifically focused on this whole issue of this spying on the Trump campaign. So just to give you a background with that, Inspector General Horowitz was an Obama appointee, but he's also a lifetime bureaucrat in the sense that he's not really partisan or not trying to be partisan. So he's trying to give a report that doesn't have a whole lot of spin on it, but just relaying the facts. Now, he is not a prosecutor. He has no authority to bring charges against anyone, to hold anyone accountable for what they did. That's up to the Attorney General to appoint somebody else to do that right now. That is Special Prosecutor Durham is working with Attorney General Barr, and we have to assume that they've had all this information for some time, and Durham has much more latitude and can be much more comprehensive in his investigation than the Inspector General was. So his job was to just find the basic facts surrounding this issue. Now, let me explain to you briefly, what is the FISA Court? Well, this was a special secret court that was set up in the United States after 9/11 to allow law enforcement to get warrants below the radar to investigate international terrorists or other people who might spy on us, so that they could do their job lawfully and legally, but without tipping off people that could potentially cause the death of millions in America. Some people argue that that's too much power for the government. Others say it's a necessary evil given what happened on 9/11. I'm not going to debate that right now, but it's in existence. Now, so what happened? Well, the Inspector General found that there was a gross negligence that went on in the FBI surrounding these FISA warrants. They hid information from the court. They even changed documents. They fraudulently changed documents so that what was presented to the FISA court judge or judges, I don't know if it was one or more, was not the actual truth. Now, I heard a former FBI agent talking about this, somebody who was involved in previous types of investigations. He's now retired. He doesn't have an axe to grind, but he said, look, whenever the FBI goes after either a FISA warrant or a wiretap warrant, This is considered the most serious invasion of privacy in the United States, so they double-check, triple-check, quadruple-check their facts to make sure that everything is in order so that nobody's rights are abused. At least that's the way the system is supposed to work. Now, what actually happened was there were some rogue agents within the FBI, and they were not properly supervised. Some might even argue that they had some leadership people who were working with them. We remember the story of Strzok and Page, the two FBI agents who were having an extramarital affair, and they sent all these emails back and forth to each other, saying how much they hated Trump, wanted Hillary to win, and how they would stop Trump if he should win. It showed real bias there, obviously. It's a situation where these people were not law enforcement professionals, they were partisan hacks. And because they never expected that Hillary was going to lose in 2016, so they felt justified in doing what they did, and they hated Trump. The problem is those above them in authority went along with what they wanted to do. And McCabe has been listed, even Comey has been listed as either he was uninvolved and didn't know really what was going on, or he was a partisan too, just pretending he isn't. That remains to be seen. But what happened was Hillary's campaign and the Democrat National Committee decided they wanted to have an insurance policy to make sure that she could beat Trump. This is how insecure this lunatic is. This is how scared the Democrats really were of her being such a lousy candidate that she could lose. So what they did was, through a series of intermediaries, created this document known as the Steele dossier that supposedly had all this dirt on Trump with the Russians. Now, the thing was basically phony, false. It was never verified in any way. It can't be verified because it doesn't have actual facts in it. It has rumor, innuendo, and really made up stuff. The Clinton campaign paid for its production. They tapped a former British secret agent guy, Christopher Steele, to help write it and paid him for it. And what they produced was something that was a damaging piece against Trump. Now, where the real fraud came in is they then managed to get this to the FBI and managed to get the FBI to believe it and begin to investigate the Trump campaign. This is before the election, 2016. Now just think about this, what happened. One major political party in the United States, the Democrat Party, managed to convince the nation's premier law enforcement organization, the FBI, to work on their behalf to discredit their political opponents. This had nothing to do with the law. It had nothing to do with justice. It had nothing to do with crime. It was everything to do with politics. And this has the Clintons' slimy hands all over it. This is how they operate. This is how they've always operated. But the FBI was filled with either partisan hacks or dupes that went along with it. Now, not the majority of the FBI. It was just these group of investigating agents were doing this. So in order to more effectively spy on the Trump campaign, they needed to get a FISA warrant issued so that they could wiretap and secretly surveil the Trump campaign. They used the Steele dossier as their main basis of information to present to the court to say, here, we think this guy's guilty. And the court accepted it. Now, we could blame the judge, but how does the judge know? He's trusting the word of these investigators and prosecutors that they're telling the truth. One thing this retired FBI agent said was, look, we need to always give the full amount of information to the court so that they can make an informed decision. Evidence that supports our desire for the warrant, evidence that would work against it, that protects the rights of the possible accused. They have to present all of it. They can't hold anything back. In any criminal court case, if the prosecution withholds evidence that would help to set the defendant free, that's fraud, and they can be disbarred, removed from office. They can even go to prison for fraud. So this is the seriousness that went on here. These presenting FBI agents and the FBI lawyers basically lied to the judge about what the evidence was, and the judge issued the warrant, and it was renewed, I think they said 3 times, all with this phony evidence. This retired FBI agent said, look, normally the FBI would never trust just one unsubstantiated source to verify facts. They might take that, put it in a file somewhere to have as a basis if they get more information, but they wouldn't just rely on one source. That's asking for trouble, even if you think it's reliable. You've got to be sure that you're building a solid case and you have witnesses that can corroborate each other and so on. They didn't. This Steele dossier was a piece of garbage. It was a Clinton hit piece is what it was. And yet these FBI agents who hated Trump pushed it, and they ended up using it as a basis for spying on one of the people in Trump's campaign, Carter Page, who was an advisor. They made it seem like he was some kind of traitor to the United States, and in fact he actually was somebody who had worked with the CIA to get information on Russia and I think other countries. I'm not sure. He was a patriot. He's a Naval Academy graduate. He's a good guy. He was a good guy, but he was somebody who was trying to help Trump. But they wanted to spy on him. They came into meetings with the Trump campaign pretending to be there just to give them security briefings, and what they were really doing was trying to spy on what was going on. There's a lot of slime that went on with this. It's sad that the FBI could have anyway had their fingerprints on this, but they did. And part of it has to do with, I think, McCabe and Comey allowing it, or even maybe being more involved than we know. So the Inspector General puts out this report. He says there's 17 glaring errors in here, and I think they said there were actually 50 mistakes or whatever made. But he claimed there was no bias. Now, let's say what he did say and didn't say. First of all, we need to understand that incompetence can't explain 17 major mistakes in an investigation, all of which moved in one direction against Donald Trump and his campaign. Incompetence would mean that the mistakes are random and that they're mixed, and that, but if they're all focused on one thing, that's not random incompetence, that's intentional. Let's be honest here. The odds of 17 things all functioning against Trump as just random mistakes, the numbers on that would be astronomical. So what did the IG say? Now, as soon as his report came out, all the mainstream press said, that's it, there's no bias, there was no attempt to get Trump, he's paranoid, there was nothing about, the FBI trying to destroy his presidency, blah, blah, blah. But what the IG did say is, in his report, he found no documentary or testimonial evidence of bias. He didn't say there was none. In fact, he acknowledged that there was bias in the emails between the two lovers, Strzok and Page. Which, by the way, just a quick aside, the people who did the movie Frack Nation, which was a very pro-fracking film to dispel the nonsense that I think it was called Gasland, some stupid Hollywood movie that sought to destroy the idea of fracking for natural gas in America. But these people produced a show that I think was called FBI Love Letters. It was actually a live performance that they videotaped. It's on YouTube. You can find it. And they had Dean Cain, the actor who played Superman in the Lois and Clark TV series back in the 90s, read as Peter Strzok. And they had Christy Swanson, who was, I think she was Buffy the Vampire Slayer and did other films since, as Lisa Page, and they just were on stage with these folders reading back and forth like they were talking to each other, but they're really just reciting their text messages. And it was absolutely hilarious. You can find it on YouTube if you want to watch something that's funny, and it shows just how slimy these two were. But getting back to what we were talking about here, the IG said, look, in our investigation, we found no documentary evidence of bias. In other words, there were no documents out there that said, we hate Trump, we're going to try to get rid of him. or something to that effect. So nobody was dumb enough to put anything down on paper. Second, the testimonial evidence that was missing, he basically was saying, nobody we interviewed said, I hate Trump, I was working against him. So that when he said there was no bias in those two areas, that's all he was talking about. He wasn't claiming that in general the investigation showed no bias, but he had no documentation that he could provide to prove it. That's not his job. That's the job of the investigators, of Durham and Barr and so on. So the national press lied because they were so quick to try to sweep the IG report under the rug because of this whole impeachment circus that's going on. When in reality, after we saw the hearing that happened last Wednesday in the Senate Judiciary Committee with Lindsey Graham and Mike Lee and Ted Cruz and a number of other senators, they just completely savaged what was done with this. And it's certainly not the end. But it proves that there was a concerted effort to try to destroy Trump before he got elected and even after he was elected. So, the investigators will have to get to the bottom of it, but it proves that, and they use the FBI to do it. So this is horrible that our premier law enforcement agency was manipulated like this or willingly went along with the whole Clinton crime family foundation to try to get Hillary elected. Something has to be done about that, and we'll see what happens. So that's where that lies right now. That's the truth about the Inspector General's report. So that's going to be ongoing, so just keep watching the news for that and see what happens with that information. This is the worst political scandal possibly in American history, that an agency like the FBI was used by the Democrat Party to try to destroy the Republican Party in an election year. Now, let's shift to the other major circus that's going on, the whole impeachment nonsense. What we saw this week is that Gerald Nadler's committee, the House Judiciary Committee, voted strictly along party lines to approve 2 articles of impeachment. We talked about that in my last update, that's what they had drafted and they were going to vote on them. First one is abuse of power. Second one is obstruction of Congress. Where that stands right now is they are going to schedule a vote, I believe, on Wednesday in the full House to decide whether to impeach the president or not. They will need 218 votes on each of the articles. They'll vote on them separately. And if they get the 218 votes that they need, then it will be passed on to the Senate for a trial. I think I mentioned that briefly before. So that's where we are with that. Now, as I said before, and I still agree, there will not be a vote Wednesday if Nancy Pelosi doesn't believe she has at least 218 votes. I can guarantee you that. She's not going to make herself that embarrassed. The last thing she ever does in politics is she makes herself look like a fool. It's not going to happen. She's been a swamp rat for decades, and she's going to protect her turf and protect her money and all the other stuff that's going on there. So I do anticipate that probably there will be enough votes for those things to pass. Keep in mind, it's only a simple majority. With the House of Representatives having 435 members, they only need 218 to have that majority. They have, 236, I believe, or 237, I can't remember, Democrats compared to Republicans. Now, we've already heard that one of the Democrat members has decided to leave the Democrat Party and be a Republican because he's so disgusted with them. That's the same guy from New Jersey that voted against pursuing impeachment a month or so ago. And there are others that might be him-hawing around. Remember, there are 31 members of Congress that were elected Democrat members of Congress that were elected in 2018 in districts that Donald Trump carried in 2016. So next year, it's a presidential election. Trump's back on the ballot, and these members will have to run again. All 435 members of the House have to run every 2 years. So what's going to happen is, will the people who live in those 31 districts vote for Trump and vote for the Republican who's running against these Democrats? that remains to be seen. But they are the most vulnerable ones. And if you live in a district that has one of those 31, and I'll try to put a link at the bottom of this video so you can find out exactly who they are, so that you'll know what to do and say. There is time to contact them before the vote on Wednesday to express your displeasure, and that's what you should do, because what's happening is unconstitutional. The 2 articles of impeachment are not listed in the Constitution. It's not a high crime or a misdemeanor. It's not bribery. It's not treason. Despite all the blustering that the Democrats had about that, they never did bring those. And there also has been another major development that most people are unaware of, that really destroys half of the Democrat argument. Alan Dershowitz, who is a former Harvard Law School professor, himself a liberal Democrat, but more of an honest liberal, shall we say, has pointed out the fact that the second article of impeachment, the obstruction of Congress impeachment article, is now null and void. Well, why is that? Well, their rationale behind that is they tried to subpoena many members of the Trump administration to testify in Adam Schiff's secret in the bunker impeachment hearings. And the Trump administration refused. So they're saying, well, he obstructed Congress. But there is a constitutional remedy for that the Democrats refuse to employ. When the one branch of the government tries to control another branch of the government, when the Congress tries to force the office of the president to do something and they don't want to, the legal remedy for that is these members of Congress would have to take their desire for these subpoenas to be followed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court would make a decision as to whether they are legal and thus compelling the president's office to comply with the subpoenas. They are not automatically forced to just have to give in because the Congress does not supersede the president. They are separate but equal branches of government. They are at the same level of authority. One does not have authority over the other. And when these conflicts happen, that's why the third branch is there to interpret the law and come up with a ruling. Now, this course of action was brought to the Democrats' attention, said, why didn't you go to the courts? Well, the only thing I heard from Pelosi and some of the others is, oh, there's just no time. There's just no time. We can't wait for that. We can't wait around for that. What they're really saying is, we're afraid we'd have lost that and then our whole case would have fallen out, fell out the window and we'd have been completely looking like fools. And they didn't want things to drag out. If this drags well into 2020, all it's going to do is damage the Democrat presidential candidates in their primaries. So Pelosi was hurrying to get this done. Now, in an interview, she said more than she wanted to say. You never know what medication or alcohol she's on half the time. So, she was asked by the reporter, well, why the rush for this? You've been accused of rushing. She said, oh no, we've been working on this for a good 2.5 years, which goes back to long before this whole Ukraine thing came up. So it basically proves what Trump has been saying, and many in the conservative media have been saying, is that the Democrats have never accepted the 2016 election result. They don't consider Trump to be a legitimate president, and they've been working ever since that election night to try to get rid of him. And she confirmed that. So it has nothing to do with the facts. It has to do with their political bias, their fears of losing their grip over Washington and their power and, their future graft and corruption and all that stuff. So that's what's going on there. Now, why is this second article rendered null and void? One of the other things the Democrats have been trying to do is get Trump's tax records. And there are actually 3 cases that were presented to the Supreme Court. I think one is from New York State and two are federal from the Democrat Party or from the House. And the Trump administration basically has said, go spit. We're not going to give you Trump's taxes. And they tried to compel him. But in fact, what happened was I think it was the Trump administration, filed to the Supreme Court to make a ruling. I don't know if it was Trump or the Democrats. Somebody did. So it went to the Supreme Court. This past week after Nadler's hearings, the Supreme Court announced, and it wasn't directly in connection with it, it was just in their timetable, that they will take up that case as to whether Trump must comply with those subpoenas for his tax records. They have granted its standing, and it's on hold. So that means they have said the proper way to prove an abuse of power, such as obstructing Congress, which is the second one, is to go to the court and have the court rule in your favor, and then you can legally go back to the Senate and make the case, yes, we have this ruling from the Supreme Court, they're supposed to release this information, they're supposed to obey the subpoenas, but even though the court compelled them to do so, they didn't. So, because of that, that means this cannot be an obstruction of Congress charge leveled against the president because they didn't appeal to the Supreme Court to make a ruling on it. And it has to do with the subpoenas that they were sending to the Trump administration people for Schiff's private hearings. So it's connected to that. But the fact that the court took up this other subpoena separation of powers argument basically renders this second article null and void because they didn't follow the procedure. Now, for the Democrats, that's nothing new and unusual. They don't really care about the Constitution unless they can twist it to meet their goals. They don't care about following due process or the law or federal rules of evidence or anything that has to do with our legal system in America. They're power hungry, and that's all they care about. They don't care how much they lie. They don't care how much they cheat. They just want to stay in power, and they absolutely resent everything Trump has done to take away their power by giving it back to us, the people of the United States. So, I don't know how much of this second argument will be made by the Republicans in the House on Wednesday. I'm sure there'll be a time of debate before they vote. They won't just come in, vote, and leave. They will have to have some debate. How much of that will be brought up, I don't know. The Republicans have beat this dead horse until the darn thing's bloody about how none of these charges mean anything. Abuse of power just is a generic way of saying the president won't do what we want him to do, so therefore we have the right to get rid of him. Hogwash. Foreign policy is the purview of the president. The Constitution says that Trump was doing foreign policy in the way that he thought was right, even though the Democrats didn't want to. They're also trying to cover up for Joe Biden and also other guilty Democrats who've been playing this money laundering game. I've already talked about that in the previous report. So this is where things stand right now. Now, what will happen in the Senate, assuming it gets there? The Senate, first of all, won't take it up until the new year because this is the last week before Christmas. If the House votes on it on Wednesday, they're all going home Friday. And they would have to organize House managers to be like the prosecuting attorneys for the trial. All of that will take some time to organize. The Constitution says if it's the president that's impeached, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court has to be the presiding judge. So that'll have to be organized with Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. So that will take some time. It won't happen before Christmas. But it also means all these Democrats who vote for this on Wednesday, they're going to have to go back home for 3 weeks and listen to the voice of their voters. So good luck to them with that. We've already seen there have been a lot of heated town halls where many of their voters are not at all happy with this political nonsense in this game they're playing. So we'll see what happens with that, but that's where things stand right now. The IG report will provide fodder for the ongoing investigation with Attorney General Barr and Special Prosecuting Attorney Durham, and the House will vote on Wednesday on the Articles of Impeachment. I will, as I said, I'll put links at the bottom of this so that you can do further research on this. Also, there was a very good article online today from the Daily Signal written by Hans von Spakovsky, I think his name is. about how impeachment in the Senate would work. I won't repeat all those details. I'll just put the link there for you to be able to read that on your own if you want to know more. So it's an interesting time in our history. It's also a time when the Democrats are trying to destroy or at least permanently warp the Constitution. So we've got to stand against that. Again, as I've said before several times with these reports, whether you like Trump or not, what is happening here is a slap in the face of all of our rights, because if they can do this to the most powerful man in this country, they can do it to any and every one of us if we oppose something that they want and challenge their power and authority. And in America, the people rule. I think it was it James Madison who said, no king in America except King Jesus. So they were affirming a Christian faith, but also they were saying there wasn't going to be anybody who was going to tell the rest of us how to live. Power comes from the people, from the consent of the governed, and these few radical Democrats in the House think that they have the authority to turn the Constitution on its ear. Remember, even if this vote turns out to be like 220 to 210 or 215 or something. I don't know what the numbers will be. It's not a huge majority, when the Congress decided to impeach Richard Nixon with their vote in the House, there were over 400 members who voted to do it, and many of those were Republicans, so it was bipartisan. This is not the case here. I don't think there are going to be any Republicans that vote in favor of impeachment in the House. None did when they had the vote for beginning the process, so I don't see any doing that. The question is how many of these 31 Democrats will seek to save their own political hides rather than going along with the leadership. I don't believe for a minute what Pelosi's saying about, we're not going to whip the votes, we're going to tell people to vote however you want. That's nonsense. If she didn't think she had the 218 votes, she wouldn't be taking this vote. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what the final numbers look like. We'll see who it is exactly we need to get rid of next year from the House, and we'll see exactly who it is who is standing with the president. So stay tuned and stay engaged, and don't listen to most of what the national press is saying, because they're all still biased in the tank for Hillary and the Democrats and Pelosi and everything that we all see as nasty and ugly and detrimental to our freedom. So, again, let's see how it plays out, but this is where things stand right now with both of those two things, the IG report and the Articles of Impeachment. So thank you for listening. I appreciate the time. Please subscribe to our channel and hit the notifications bell. Again, if this type of current events reports become more appealing to people, maybe we'll start a new YouTube page for that. But for right now, I'm just including it with the Country Living on a Shoestring page. So thank you for your support, and thank you for fighting to keep America free.